welcome to another episode of the Black Dog Cast. Now, this one's been a long time coming, and I've wanted to get this guest on the podcast for a while. In this episode, we're actually talking to my psychiatric nurse practitioner, Cecelia Howard, about the experience that I've had taking a couple of different psychiatric medications. Now, the reason that I wanted to get Cecelia on the podcast is because I've had a very positive experience in working with her and taking a couple of different medications. But more than that, I think she has a pretty unique and very thorough approach to the process of prescribing medications that I think can be beneficial to anybody that may be thinking about going down this route. So we talk in detail about her approach, how she works with patients. We talk a lot specifically about my experience and just really using that as a case study. I should caveat this with obviously saying that, I'm not a doctor, she is. She's my doctor. We talk a lot specifically about my case. So, take what you will from that and hopefully learn from it. But if you are going down this route of seeking help with medication for a mental health issue, then obviously you need to consult your own doctor with that. So yeah, let's get to the podcast and hear from Cecelia.
Okay, so Cecelia, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So you're with us from my old hood in Ashland, Oregon, just around the corner from where I used to live. Why don't you explain a little bit about kind of what you do and what your path was to get to where you are today?
Oh, well, so I'm a nurse. First and foremost, probably to the core of my being. I've been a nurse for almost 40 years now. And I worked in ICU and hospice and developed chronic disease programs to include pain management. Because working in hospice, I was always really good at analyzing a situation and kind of coming up with a medication cocktail that would manage all the complex symptoms of my patients. And so I was going to have a specialty in pain management. Mm-hmm. And both of my sons have schizoaffective disorder, and my youngest son has autism as well. They're like 39 and 40 now, but they were in the throes of, they had both of them had their illnesses show up for about 10 years. And I noticed that my kids didn't get good care. Mm-hmm. That people did not pay attention to side effects, or they just really didn't take the complaints and the issues seriously, and they didn't think through a complex system, I guess, is what I think of it as. Like when you manage pain and nausea, it's a complex system. Mm-hmm. And so I found that they didn't do that with mental health. They still don't do it with pain management much either, unless you go to a good specialist. So yeah. I thought, I could do that. I could be a psychiatric nurse practitioner and take a part of take a piece of the problem, because I've always believed that if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Mm-hmm. And so I decided that I would do psychiatric nurse practitioner program, and that's how I got to where I am now.
Can you explain, because I guess a nurse practitioner was a new term that I came across when I came to the United States, because we don't have it in England. And I'm right, it sort of sits in between a doctor and a nurse. Is that right?
Yes, I guess maybe weeks. I'll have to be careful in case there's any psychiatric nurse practitioners listening, because it could be a sensitive issue. I mean, It is, we don't sit between anyone.
I guess I meant let me caveat that. I mean, in terms of the sort of training and seniority, maybe. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's what I mean. I mean, nurses are really an independent profession from the development, and we used to work. In hospitals, a registered nurse works under the direction of a doctor. So in that way, there's a hierarchy and that kind of a system. But nurses, the focus for a nurse is really significantly different than a doctor. And in some states in the United States, nurse practitioners can work independently, and in maybe about half the states, they can work. They have to work under a doctor or train under a doctor for a certain period of time. now nursing has a doctorate degree requirement, whereas when I went back to school, which was kind of helped me to think of this as a destiny thing, it was the last term of the master's degree requirements. So then they were going to move to a doctorate when I had the opportunity to go back to school.
Yeah.
So now they're both required a doctorate, and they're really kind of different. Completely at this point in practice, they're different.
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah.
And not to be defensive, but I mean just to give honor to nursing and not to be at all offensive.
Yeah, no, I know, I get it, and that's why I asked the question, because I think it is a little bit different in different countries, and
different states too.
Right. Yeah. So I guess a large part of what you do is obviously working with patients and prescribing various psychiatric medicines. Just to get a sense of that landscape, you're one of a number of different practitioners that can prescribe these types of medications. That's right. And those the other ones are sort of primary care physicians and psychiatrists.
Yes. Yeah. I was trying to think. PAs can too, and I think physicians' assistants, to complicate the system, more, are now independent practitioners. They used to have to work under the direction of a doctor. Now they're independent themselves, so they also can prescribe medications.
And the way that you work is also in an independent fashion, right? You work for yourself and you work independently, and you can prescribe medication independently. You don't need to work with a doctor, for example.
Right.
Okay. Got it. Just wanted to clear that up, because it does vary a lot by country and by state. So I guess what I wanted to talk about today is obviously to use my own experience. And I guess I should point out right from the very beginning that I am one of your patients. And I've enjoyed very much working with you. And I've wanted to get you on the podcast for a while to really use my own experience and talk through my own experience with you to sort of showcase what you do and how you work, because I think it's really important that people understand this whole space in more detail. I also feel I feel very fortunate that I came across you and started working with you, because from my perspective, it seems like you have quite a different approach to some providers who prescribe these sorts of medicine. And so that's, I guess, that's what I want to dig into. And I suppose I first came to you because, this must have been, 5 or 6 years ago, quite soon after I first moved to Ashland. And I'd been going through, my own battles with depression, and it had been persistent, and it wasn't getting any better. And it was actually my wife, Gretchen, that found you, and you were a block from where we used to live, on B Street in Ashland. And so I feel there was an element of sort of serendipity in finding you so close by. And then, we started working together. And I guess the thing that came across when we first started working is that you don't just write a prescription out, first of all, for a psychiatric medicine. And we did a lot of work on, using various vitamin supplements. And can you just talk a little bit about how you approach when you work with a patient, first of all, and those factors that you consider before you just go down the route of writing somebody a prescription for a drug?
So, first thing I try to do is do a evidence-based assessment. So, when you came in, you'll probably remember the big packet of paperwork that you had. Mm-hmm. And I do that, and I consider whether or not what the person might be struggling with. And then I also assess, part of that assessment is, how does this person feel about medications? Have they tried supplements and nutrition in the past? What's their lifestyle like as far as exercise, what they do? I weigh all of those considerations. And how impactful is this in their lives? Like, are they in crisis, or are they just, are they not in crisis but have been? I mean, all of those kinds of things. And so I kind of weigh that to decide whether or not to recommend, what to recommend to the person, or if I should just prescribe a medication for someone.
Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about kind of, when I first came to see you, and I remember you asked me an awful lot of questions. We talked a lot about kind of, my lifestyle. And I remember you asked a lot about kind of, what it was like when I got depressed and sort of what the symptoms were. And from that, you're able to kind of, you're able to glean quite a lot of information as far as what's going on with somebody's brain chemistry, right? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that and the sort of things that you can spot that are related to different neurotransmitters and that sort of thing.
They're sometimes two different things. Well, they are different things, obviously. So first of all, I think that one of the things I tend to do is ask a lot of questions. And one of them I commonly ask people is kind of to get a sense of what that depression looks like. Like, what is it? How does it manifest in their lives? Some people get depressed and they get anxious and reactive. Some people get depressed and they can't get up. They're kind of stay in bed. Sometimes people have constant depression since childhood, and sometimes depression cyclic. Sometimes people feel depressed because they feel anxious, so they feel too anxious to do the things they need to fulfill their lives. And so then they start, or function at work. So then they get depressed about that. So I really try to get a sense of what that depression looks like, because that really gives you a lot of hints about what might be going on.
Mm-hmm. And then I remembered a specific example with me. I think there was some things related to how I what's the word? How I resorted to drinking when I got depressed. And I remember there was something in there where you were able to sort of point to a particular neurotransmitter or something that was going on with the brain chemistry, right? Do you remember that?
There are, different neurotransmitters, and maybe the lack of function of them for whatever reason, supply or the pathway, have different kinds of expressions. So one of the things that can drive depression, particularly, I'm going to say like cyclothymia, bipolar 2, depression kind of experiences, is glutamate. Mm-hmm. And glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter. It's it's a really important neurotransmitter that it's really been relatively new over the past, several years of really looking at it and trying to understand how do we modulate this neurotransmitter. So it's a neuroexcitatory one that just can kind of get the brain, I want to say, going in whatever way that brain's designed to go. So it just seems to activate different processes. If the person tends to have psychosis, it might, excessive glutamate or excessive responsiveness to it could trigger psychosis, or could be mood swings, or it could be depression or panic attacks. So glutamate's kind of involved in all of those things. And glutamate and GABA are on a seesaw. So when glutamate's up, GABA, the calming neurotransmitter, is down. And when GABA's up, glutamate goes down. So people who tend to be sensitive maybe to glutamate in varying degrees will respond to depression or worry or stress by wanting to drink, because drinking brings the glutamate down and the GABA up. So it's kind of that's, what I was looking at. And in treating someone that you think might have bipolar 2 disorder, or soft bipolar, as some people like to call it, is Lamotrigine. And Lamotrigine is a seizure drug. Well, glutamate is implicated in seizures too. It's the brain, kind of neuroexcitatory. And so when someone has cyclic depressions, and they're kind of unusual depressions in the sense that they might be, they're not crying all the time, but they just can't get going, or they just want to withdraw, but they're not necessarily sad. I mean, all of these, they don't quite feel like is a, kind of a abstract term, but they don't seem like someone who has just typical depression. It's more cyclic, and glutamate sensitivity would go along with why I might think someone might do better with like a Lamotrigine, a mild seizure drug that is used to help some types of depression as opposed to an antidepressant.
Yeah. And well, before we get to sort of, drugs like Lamotrigine and others, you also try a bunch of different, vitamin supplements as well. And I remember we did that first of all. Right. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because it seems to me that's quite an unusual approach. Is that right?
Well, it can be. There's now a specialty in psychiatry, which I am not. So I'm always careful about recommending supplements and trying to make sure that what I might be recommending is a nutritional supplement and not a herb, and that it's something that a standard psychiatrist might order. And so one of the things that lowers glutamate is N-acetylcysteine, NAC. And NAC is a supplement actually that just got not taken off the market, but the FDA has indicated that they're somehow going to restrict the use of it as just a supplement. And so it's now has a lot of kind of struggle, I guess I want to say, but N-acetylcysteine reduces glutamate, and it's probably one of the most commonly prescribed supplements in psychiatry. Because it really can kind of reduce glutamate and kind of help that responsiveness to excessive glutamate. But there's so much about the glutamate receptors that we don't know. They're also associated with memory. So, So I usually start to look at, I think about NAC. In Europe, they use a couple of different supplements for depression. One of those is SAMe. And SAMe is a methyl donor. It's it's a kind of a coenzyme, and they use it in France. They started using it in France for depression. So sometimes I try to see, do I think this person might benefit from SAMe? Or in Europe, they use L-tryptophan, which is the amino acid that helps that your brain takes. I mean, it's an essential amino acid, and it makes serotonin and melatonin. And so I tried it, and they treat bipolar disorder also with it, not bipolar 1, but bipolar 2 disorder type symptoms with L-tryptophan.
And then what about folate? Because that was another one that we tried for quite a long time. Can you sort of speak to what that does? So usually what I do, and I know this is a little unusual too, but not hopefully too unusual, and is that I offer people genetic testing. Yeah, I want to come to that for sure, because that's a big one.
And so, I like to, especially if I have someone where it's just not clear, and usually when people come to me, they've gone to other people. Lots of times not. But, if I'm not really kind of clear, or that person could use also some increased belief, I like to use genomide testing, because it tells me a number of things. It looks at one of the glutamate receptors, for example, and tells me whether the person is hyperresponsive to that glutamate receptor. And then, even though there are multiple types of glutamate receptors, I can, as is said, is, like a preponderance of the evidence. It kind of adds more to that pot in my mind of what might be helpful for a person. And it also helps people understand how their brain might work. And I say might because, it's still a new science, and information is still, changes about it. And that's why it's, some doctors don't like to use it because it's not mainstream, because they're like, the evidence isn't quite there. I'm personally not looking for a litmus paper test. I'm trying to see, does that person lean towards this way? Do they have other things? So methylated folic acid is one of the things they look at on the genetic test. And it's often recommended if someone doesn't respond or their depression doesn't respond to the treatments, that you consider that they might have a folate methylation problem. And so they can recommend supplementing, and I just like to test for it because the supplements aren't cheap and you're asking people to invest. And I think, it's just helpful along with all the other information to know, can that person methylate folic acid?
Yeah. Right. So this DNA test, anybody I speak to about it, most people are totally surprised and they've never heard of it. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's a thing I bang on about with a lot of people because I think it's really important for people to know about it. Just explain simply what it does and how you use it.
So I do use a couple of different genetic tests, and the one I prefer is Genomind, and they look at 15 different neurotransmitters. And then they look at, it's grown now, I haven't counted them in a long time, maybe 10 different liver enzyme and drug metabolism processes to see how does that person metabolize drugs using that pathway. And so, the mental health markers kind of look at how the person might use serotonin, how they're kind of built to use dopamine, which is really important to me. And it's been a well-researched area in ADHD, whether or not people break dopamine down fast or slow, whether they can methylate folic acid. It looks at, what else does it look at? Like I said, the glutamate receptor. It looks at two of the electrical channels, the calcium and the sodium ion channels, which, when you look at them, for example, the sodium ion channel is associated with a number of disorders. And so is the calcium ion channel. I mean, there are hundreds of pieces of genes that come together and life experiences to create different disorders. But when they kind of looked at what should we test for, they looked at the sodium and the calcium ion channels seem to consistently show up in mental health disorders. So they tested for them. And the electrical channels can be associated with mood swings. The sodium ion channel is associated with seizures. More people in the autism spectrum have the sodium ion channel mutations. Calcium ion channels are associated with some social anxiety to the point of paranoia and mood swings, like in bipolar 2 disorder. Lamotrigine regulates both the sodium and the calcium ion channels. So I kind of look at all of those things and put it together with the evidence-based tools that I have people complete, and I try to make, combined with what they want, the best plan of a place to start. Also, whether a person can metabolize different drugs or not is really important. They might have tried 2 antidepressants before, but they might use a liver enzyme that doesn't work well for them. And so then that also helps you kind of tease out, well, this might be we might have a better shot at this antidepressant working because they can actually metabolize it and use it.
Yeah. I mean, I remember what jumped out at mine was, the DNA test obviously gives you this sort of predictor of how you would respond to various psychiatric drugs, right? And in my case, the most common, the most common type of antidepressant, which is an SSRI, had a massive cross in the box, which said that they would not only not work, but they might have an adverse effect. And I was just left thinking, well, all these people out there are just going to their primary care physician and probably getting prescribed an SSRI without much thought. And it might actually make their symptoms worse, right?
Right. Yeah. And also, people go to their primary care physician and get an antidepressant, which might make the situation worse.
Yeah. Yeah. So what, I guess not taking my case in isolation, because, I don't know, maybe I just got lucky. And for me, the results that came out on that on that test were very accurate. Am I right in thinking you use this test with the majority of your patients, right?
Yeah, I would say a majority.
And off the top of your head, sort of, how many times does it get it right?
Pretty most of the time, I guess. I feel like it helps explain. It's not necessarily right. Like, I know that they make they'll say, well, this antidepressant, these might work for this person, or this might work for this person. What the gene test doesn't do is put them all together.
Right.
So
put them all together as in if somebody needs let's call it a cocktail of several psychiatric drugs.
Or even the pathways. So like they'll look at antidepressants completely separate than the electrical channels. There's nothing that brings all of it together to help you kind of get a sense of the person.
Yeah.
And so I think, so in that way, there's not a get it right or get it wrong, but I've not ever really, I can't think of any person off the top of my head that when we looked at the whole of the gene test that they didn't go, yeah, wow, that really helps me understand what may have been going on. Sometimes I get it completely wrong. Like if I try not to do a test because a person doesn't want to, and I'm like, oh, it seems to me like you're somebody who breaks dopamine down slow because, they got these some kind of traits, and then it'll turn out that they break it down fast. And I'll be like, wow, I got that wrong, So in that way, the gene test kind of helps direct me. But yeah.
Do you have a sense for how widely used these tests are, and how many practitioners who are prescribing these meds are using them?
So I think like when I think about my colleagues, and I don't really kind of hang out with a lot of them just simply because of time and availability for all of us, because a lot of us work independent. A lot of people I talk to use them, but they don't really think about them. They don't really think about the different neurotransmitters and pathways and what's that saying. They more do their assessment and create their own ideas, and then look at the gene test almost as that litmus paper. Oh, they shouldn't have an SSRI. I'll give them a different one, a different antidepressant. I don't know, kind of a geek, I guess. I think, my passion is trying to kind of tease out what might be the best combination for a patient. And I've talked to a number of clinicians who they just go, people just don't think about things like as much as you do. So in that way, I really do try to, I try to be the change that I'd like to see, because mental health medications really can rock people's worlds. It can change their lives and make their lives better. And it could also cause a lot of problems for them. And so I take trying to find the right combination really seriously.
Yeah. I guess, so just going back a stage, what's the advice to somebody who thinks that they might need to talk to somebody like you, and at what stage should somebody or their family, think about them seeing somebody that prescribes medicine?
I think that, there's a criteria in the DSM that's in almost all the diagnoses. And is the symptoms causing harm to their lives, their interpersonal relationships, their work? So at that point, when things are impacting your life, you should definitely seek help. And the younger the person is, not like younger, like 13, 14. I think so many times we just jump to pathologize normal life experiences. Like, for example, I'll give a blatant one. People will come in and go, I'm still crying. I'm more depressed. I had put my dog of 10 years down last week and I'm still crying. And I look at them and I think, you should still be crying. This doesn't have anything to do with your medications. It has to do with life. So I think in young people, I struggle with that. And that's why I do adults only,
right.
Especially in adolescence. It's so rocky. But there are some signs that a young person can be developing something like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, and really can use assessment and evaluation. And I think that's a point where at least the parents should seek professional help to discuss the situation with their child, not always necessarily dragging them into it. But initially, every case is individual. But I think when it's impacting your life and we all know the wellness habits that help sustain mood, but lots of us don't take them seriously. And,
we particularly don't take them seriously when we're experiencing a mental health issue.
Right. Both of them. And so when you're not able to sustain those things, or no interest, I was talking to my son about depression, and I said, honey, you seem really very depressed to me. And he goes, I'm not depressed. And then we were up doing something, and he's like, I just am not interested in anything. Mm-hmm. Nothing that I used to think that I really loved, I don't love anymore. And he saw that as a problem of not loving. And I said, the first symptom of depression is lack of interest or pleasure in doing things that you would typically find enjoyable. And so I think when you can't do those things, I think finding someone. And I think if you go to see someone and they just automatically grab to their prescription pad in 15 minutes, I think that's a warning sign for people. I think
get out of there.
Right. What is this person? What did they ask me? Did they have me complete evidence-based tools? Because really, we know that as clinicians, we are really not very good at predicting what mood state a person is in. That's why evidence-based tools were developed so that you could actually see in black and white what a person is experiencing and whether they get better. Because sometimes people come back and go, I'm not any better. And I'll go, gee, wow, you're 40% better in 3 weeks on this assessment tool than you were before.
But they couldn't perceive it.
Right. They couldn't perceive it. So it's really, so I think those are things when you go. And even when a lot of people offer, initial kind of meet and greet. And I think those are things that I think are important to be aware of and ask, what does a person use? And I think that's important.
And what about combining what you do with sort of more traditional talk therapy? Is that something that do you always recommend that patients do both? Do people typically come to you, when they're already seeing a behavioral psychologist, or how does that work?
Mm-hmm. It can be the whole gamut. Mm-hmm. And I try to include some counseling skills that I feel are important in my practice, but you can only do so many things well. And my goal is to do medications well, because there are a lot of different counselors. So I do recommend that people have a counselor, probably, 80% of the time. Yeah. Depending on how self-directed, like some people just aren't self-directed, but by some point, I've usually recommended them probably 90% of the time. Yeah. Because I think it's really important.
Right. They form part of a sort of roster of, it's like a full court press almost of all the things that you can do to try and improve your mental health situation, whether it's, drugs, medication, talk therapy, diet, lifestyle, what else? There's a whole load of things that you can do, and it's good to try them all, right?
Right. And it's good to have, if you don't, not necessarily, but trying them all, but really kind of helping someone tease through what might be the best things that you need to focus on. Like for you had good lifestyle, in the sense of you ate, nutrition, exercise, meaningful work, or at least working and being engaged in that way.
Well, I don't know about that. That's always been a problem. my relationship with work. That's what I mean. But I think I've figured that one out. I get it, because I would always read sort of, people would say, oh, exercise is great for depression. I'm like, well, if you do exercise all the time anyway, you don't really get a lift. You can't go and do more exercise to improve your mental health. Mm-hmm. So do you think in when you look at a case like mine, does that direct you towards medication sooner because somebody's already checking off all of those lifestyle factors?
If they're checking off all of the, a lot of the lifestyle factors and they're still having depression, then I do think about medication. And I think about medication in the way that sometimes medication is to shore a person up and to kind of reestablish brain patterns and brain pathways that have become malfunctioning, and as much as possible, shifting them to a healthier place that the person can then start doing those wellness things that they haven't done, or explore what else. Like, is it perception that I have and I need to work on my perception about experiences? And so, medication sometimes supports someone so that they can do the work, so that eventually, as they incorporate those habits, that they can go off the medications. I mean, really, the recommendation for initial antidepressant use is to use an antidepressant for a year. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the year, the brain is supposed to be, not supposed to be in the sense of, if it doesn't, it's not good, but it's then more probable that the brain can take the pathways that are healthy and keep reproducing them, especially if the person has the habit and the lifestyle changes.
Right. I was going to say that, especially if during that time when somebody's taking an antidepressant, they've done some work in therapy and other things, and the drug has kind of lifted them out of the hole so that they can work on these things. I guess the question I have then is sort of how common is it that somebody is on a drug for a period of time and then comes off of it, versus, the mood stabilizer that I take is sort of, for me, it's a bit more of a long-term approach, right? I guess everybody's case is different, right?
Right. Everyone's case is different. And, you really kind of weigh so many things in making that decision. But for example, Lamotrigine, which is the mood stabilizer, I mean, one of the things we've talked about is, maybe that wasn't the right first place to start. Maybe it was for some reasons, but maybe it wasn't. And so
I think it was. Just to clarify, I mean, I think the immediate difference that I noticed, and this was the first drug that you prescribed me, right? So Lamotrigine is a mood stabilizer that's given to people that have bipolar and bipolar 2, right?
Yes.
And I noticed pretty much an immediate positive impact. It made me the biggest thing I noticed was productivity. So I was able to be as productive as I wanted, expected to be, and I could get things done, and that made me feel better. It didn't make me feel better per se. It made me more functional. And then the other really important thing is that I've had 0 side effects on it. So I've had an extremely positive experience, and, I still take it now at a lower dose. And we've obviously talked about what the process looks like to come off of it. And maybe that, this is a good time to talk about kind of the process that people go through to come off of a drug, because it's really important to do it right. And maybe you can talk to that in a minute. But, recently we moved across country. It was very stressful. I know before the move, you and I talked about me potentially tapering off the Lamotrigine. And then during the move, I was just like, this is not the right time. There's too much going on. This is stressful. I've got a little bit depressed. There's uncertainty on the job front. There's an element of picking your moment to come off. Right.
Yes. Very, very much so. I mean, I think all of those things. I mean, I was really glad to hear that you didn't just start weaning down off of it. And I think that's where, I feel like I try to do a lot of psychoeducation to try and help people understand their brain and how it might work and what the drugs do and how to go off of them. Like, I think education really helps a lot to empower a person to make their decisions like that. Like, this doesn't seem right. I think I'm not going to do this.
So what other things are important when somebody's thinking about coming off of a medication, in addition to just, the timing and what's going on in their life at that particular moment?
I think it's important to look at, am I doing everything I can do to sustain positive mood? Am I doing my personal work? Am I exercising? And then I think that anytime you change brain chemistry, I like to do it slowly because I find that to be the most successful, just like when you start something. I think it's helpful for people to look on the internet and see what other people's withdrawal experiences are. And of course, not take everything everyone says as Bible, but look for the preponderance of evidence. Oh, a lot of people have withdrawal side effects from this. And so like a lot of the antidepressants, particularly the serotonin norepinephrine antidepressants, have a lot of withdrawal side effects. So you go down very slowly. And I think it's very helpful for people to see what kind of experiences that they might have. Like, for example, with a serotonin norepinephrine antidepressant, they often get these brain zaps, kind of this buzzing that can happen in their head that I think is a result of taking away the norepinephrine, which is kind of more of a driven neurotransmitter. It drives signals, and then all of a sudden you take that away, then the brain keeps trying. This is my imagining, and I haven't really seen any evidence. They don't really know why these withdrawal side effects particularly happen the way they do. But my imagining is that the brain is trying to make that pathway connection and can't really quite do it. And that's that like out of the blue buzzy sensation. Well, if you expect that, then you don't get freaked out. When it does happen, then you're like, oh my gosh, if you don't know, then you're thinking something terrible is happening. And that just upsets the apple cart completely.
Yeah. And I mean, this can play out over several months, right? The process of, tapering gradually off of a medication. What are we talking, 2-3 months or longer?
It just really depends on how long the person's been using the medication, what that medication is. For example, Cymbalta, which is a serotonin norepinephrine antidepressant that helps with pain. It can take a year or more to get off of it.
Wow.
I mean, I don't particularly, when a person comes to me on it and it's not working, I almost, if I know in advance, I just won't even take the patient. Depends, I have to say. It just depends because it's so hard to get people off of it because they just out of the blue become super depressed or super suicidal, and you're like, holy cow, So it really is individual. People notice Lamotrigine tapers really. At first, sometimes they don't notice much when they go down from 200 to maybe 150 and maybe down to 100. But they can, when they get around 100, really notice it. And then some people really notice it at the beginning. So I think, being prepared.
I mean, that's where I'm at. I think we went from 200 to 100, and it's been 100 for a while, and still seems to be working. I just had another thought about, kind of related to people taking these things long term. Do people get addicted to them?
So addiction is a complicated word. Addiction, the definition of addiction is actually that you would seek out the drug even if it caused you harm and harm to your life.
Okay.
And so there's a difference between addiction and dependence. So dependence means your brain is used to that drug. Yeah. And it's used to that drug independent of the, I want to say like a lot of the emotional factors, like your brain is, dependent, like benzodiazepines are an example. After a period of a month on a benzodiazepine on a daily basis, your brain's dependent on that. And if you suddenly withdraw it, the person can have a whole range of different side effects. It could be seizures. It could just be anxiety and irritability.
Yeah.
But their brain, is dependent on it because their brain obviously needed something in the first place, but also, the brain doesn't waste time doing what you're doing for it. For example, melatonin. You take melatonin every night, your brain goes, why should I make melatonin?
Right.
Hey, really, they got it. I got other things to make. And it just goes about that, And so that's the other part about going down on an antidepressant or down on a medication is that your brain has to go, oh yeah, I guess I have to start doing this myself.
Yeah.
And it has to get on board.
So then it's fair to say that most people are dependent on these drugs then. If they're not addicted, they're certainly dependent. And does that get hard if somebody is, they take an antidepressant, it makes them feel good? Do you run into issues where people don't want to come off of them because it just makes them feel good?
Well, an antidepressant usually isn't as much. Usually there are reasons that a person wants to come off, and I don't push it one way or the other, but I usually tell people if it's their first antidepressant, we have this talk about that, that they recommend that you take it for a year. Mm-hmm. And, in Ashland, people don't like to take drugs. They already have an anti-drug slant for the most part in the culture.
Yeah.
I tell them about it in the beginning, and it really is just, it depends to me on a number of things. How long has this person been depressed? Have they been depressed their whole lives, which tells me there's some kind of biochemical process going on that is not going to be fixed by necessarily habits or nutrition. So then, I look at, those kinds of things, and I haven't really had someone not want to go off an antidepressant because they usually bring it up. But things like benzodiazepines that also have a euphoria component, same as the struggle with opiates. I mean, some people need pain medication for their whole lives because they have chronic illnesses that cause pain. And pain, for example, can destroy people's lives. They don't want to exercise. They're mad or miserable. But there's also, the addiction component. And so I think it's always looking at that and trying to weigh in, what is this person doing? Are they not, for example, I don't prescribe chronic benzodiazepines because they create a lot of dependence, both biological and psychological.
What would they be used for?
Anxiety,
right.
Panic attacks. Sometimes people need them, but it's not really very often. Lots of times it's a way that people often use them to avoid doing work that might help minimize the need. But some people need varying degrees, but they don't need the maximum dose all the time forever. You know what I mean? And that's where you start to say to someone, I usually say at the beginning, like if I'm going to give someone benzodiazepine, this is a short-term solution, and these are the things we're going to do to not need it. And here's my boundary for how long I'm willing to do this.
Yeah.
And this is why. So there is a stimulants are the other thing. A lot of times people want to use stimulants to help them be able just to function in life, to maybe have enough energy to do the things that they want to do or they need to do. And so it's always kind of teasing those things out. It's probably one of the reasons that my appointments are all an hour. Mm-hmm. I don't really feel like I can tease out what's really going on with a person in 15 minutes.
Is how rare is that your line of work, somebody takes an hour?
Not very often.
Really?
At least that's been my experience. Lots of times appointments are a half an hour.
Yeah. And
when I go to the psychopharmacology conference, the psychiatrists that are teaching are always talking about these 15-minute appointments. And I'm like, first of all, I don't need to make that much money. And second of all, I cannot think that fast about a decision that's going to impact your life.
Yeah.
For the month after I see you. I mean, some people, can do that, but they usually have a whole team of people that are doing other things.
Yeah. I I come back to what I said at the beginning about feeling very fortunate to have found you, because you do have a different approach. And I think a lot of people out there, are in this like 15-minute decision, like quick decision sort of environment, which is just not good, is it?
Well, I don't think it is. I mean, it's not good for me. I mean, I noticed that when some of the psychiatrists will talk about doing these 15-minute appointments, they have had people do evidence-based tools before they get into the doctor's office. So they have it kind of flash up on their screen.
There's a bit more to it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
For some people, for good clinicians that are really trying to do a thorough but fast job. But I don't find that to be the norm. A lot of people do 15-minute appointments, and I don't know. I just really, things come out sometimes in that last 15, 20 minutes. I'm talking to somebody, I'm like, oh, this is what's going on, not what I thought was going on, And so I find that really valuable.
Yeah. All right, let's taking a step back and sort of looking at the world of mental health right now. Sort of, you've been doing this a number of years. How are things changing? Are you seeing certain conditions on the rise? Are mental health conditions we hear a lot about them getting worse. What does it look like from your end of the profession?
I think they're getting worse. I don't know that they're getting addressed to the extent that they're getting worse. And I think there are a lot of reasons. I picked up a book in the airport a couple of years ago called Blame the Brain. Mm-hmm. And it talks about really like how we're blaming neurobiology and the brain function for depression or anxiety fear. But when you look at the world, you're going like, oh, we don't have a sense of community. Yeah. We don't have good nutrition. We don't have meaningful work. I mean, I think that's why a lot of people haven't gone back to work. They haven't really felt that their work was meaningful and that it answered some of their core values. Yeah. And so, I think there's a lot of factors that go into the increase, but toxins in our environment, it's really, if you can't methylate folic acid, for example, you're impaired in your ability to detoxify your system. And then you're exposed to different things and it really impacts you in a negative way. I don't think people are I don't think there's availability of mental health care. Like one of the reasons that I don't just up and move to Boulder is, one of the things is that there's really, I don't know who I would hand off my patients to. There really isn't someone, there really is a shortage of clinicians. And so it's, and then there's a shortage of health insurance to pay for clinicians. It's a very complicated, landscape, and particularly in the United States with private healthcare, it brings up a lot of problems. I'd add that things are not necessarily that much better in the UK. I think there are certain things which are better. I think if you need acute psychiatric care, it's available on the NHS and it doesn't cost anything. But my limited experience over there is that if you want any sort of decent therapy within a short space of time, you have to pay for it privately. So it's a challenge everywhere. And I think it's the other thing that makes it tricky in the United States. And you just mentioned, you'd like to move to Boulder. Everything is so state specific, right? That you're not allowed to practice. You can't see patients outside of Oregon, right? Well, I can if I, for example, in Colorado, if I apply for a Colorado nursing license and go through those processes. And then, of course, you have to abide by the laws in that state. Like California doesn't allow for independent practice. So I would have to work under a psychiatrist if I were going to move there. So kind of weighing all of those things, and it's, and mental health care is hard to, it's hard to afford. if you don't have a job and you're not able to work, to be able to, earn that money or have,
and those are frequently the people that need it the most, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, both of my kids feel like they are extremely fortunate in that I am working in a field that, first of all, I can help understand what's going on for them, but I can make an income that allows me to provide mental health care for them.
Yeah.
My son in Boulder, I pay for privately.
Yeah. What about sort of future directions of what's happening in this space? And I guess there's a couple of things which seem to be quite hot right now. There's an awful lot of stuff with teletherapy and with startups that are looking to provide various mental health services. And then there's the whole area of psychedelics. What do you make of those and what things might look like in the future?
I don't know what the first two areas are like. Like, what do you mean by them?
I think it's more just, companies like BetterHelp and Talkspace. I guess this is more on the behavioral therapy side. They're getting a lot of press in terms of offering mental health services over the internet. And then there's other companies that are sort of, they're packaging it all up as like a one-stop shop that's easy for people to get behavioral therapy, to get prescribed meds, other forms of tools and content that they can use. My take on it is that I look at these companies and the one thing that they're all trying to do is hire therapists, which says to me that it's not very scalable, because ultimately you still need people to provide these services. And there's only so many of those people who are qualified in each state to go around, right?
Right. Or who've gone through who've gotten licensed to be able to do that. Yeah, no, I think, one-stop shopping is great. Like if you actually have a therapist, I know there are some clinicians here locally that have a psychiatric nurse practitioner and they have 2 counselors that they work with. And, there are a number of those programs, and I think they can work well. I mean, people are more likely to go to one place to get counseling, and they've actually done that with medical help too, like having a medical nurse practitioner or a physician in a clinic that has those services, so that the person actually attends to their medical conditions as well. So I think that they can work well. As far as like video, when I first started practicing, I subscribed out of England to a program that had cognitive behavioral therapy for a lot of different disorders that I could prescribe for my patients, and they would do it from their own home. And then I could see, when I went to see them next, I would see the scores of their assessments and the statistics that they presented for those types of programs were equal, if not really close to equal, to programs that were provided in person. And you could provide those services to a number of people. There's a program that I'm just starting up.
So that was, in your experience, that was scalable somewhat without needing a person to deliver it.
Right, because I could have either, I had 2 rooms in my office, so a person could actually come in and use my computer and do that therapy while I would be in the other room and be available for them at the end of the appointment if anything came up that couldn't wait. And so it was a way of being able to provide that service without, 1, having to get that training, and 2, having to do it. And because, there's only so much of you to go around. There's a program now that I'm just signed up for out of Australia that does something similar called This Way Up. And it has a number of different online counseling protocols for different disorders. And so I think, of course, nothing works if you don't do it. But for people who are willing to do it or have someone who can assist them to do it, I think they're very helpful.
Yeah. And then lastly, what about this whole area of psychedelics with, psilocybin and ketamine and MDMA assisted therapy? What's your take on all of that? And do you think that those will become part of your arsenal anytime soon?
Well, I'm not going to be. Ketamine really requires you have to have a special licensing. Well, for all of them, you do. At first, when ketamine came out, I was leery, and it seems now to be an effective tool for some people. And I think psychedelics, at first I was thinking, oh, great, another way to get high. And we're going to call that therapy. And but, when I have a patient who's involved in that process. And so I started researching because I thought, all right, I can't just throw it out if I don't really see what's going on. And really, there's quite a bit of evidence for both of them to work when you work in conjunction with a therapist who, for example, psychedelics, help the brain actually build new pathways and kind of bypass an automatic stuck pathway. You can actually kind of recreate a different pathway, but that requires the guidance and help of a therapist while you're using the psychedelic. But there's quite a bit of research going on that's really positive. Out of Harvard, for example, I watched a couple of panel discussions on YouTube out of the East Coast. And so I was like, And then when I went to my psychopharmacology conference this year, which is so many people go to NEI, Stephen Stahl, and I took one of the sessions was on psychedelics and different modalities. And I thought for sure it was going to be a don't let your kids do drugs talk. And it wasn't. It was really, here's the evidence. And there's some positive evidence for therapist-assisted use of these drugs. And NEI doesn't support anything that's not evidence-based. I mean, these are, I hate to call them geeks, but these are geeks from a lot of the major university and teaching hospitals. And I think Stephen Stahl probably came out of England.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of.
There's a lot of evidence for them, and
exactly.
EMS as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of academic studies coming out, and a couple in the UK that I've seen out of Imperial College and King's with I think it's LSD and psilocybin assisted therapy. Do you think? I mean, is that something if let's say you did want to work with that, you'd have to go and it's a separate type of training, right?
I imagine. Yeah, I'm sure you have to have a certification. You don't have to have a certification to do ketamine, but you do have to have a license.
Yeah.
And, but as far as, the psychedelics, I'm sure, I mean, I think they're still trying to put together how are we going to allow use of these modalities in therapy. So, but yeah, I'm sure. And by that point, I'll probably just stick to what I'm doing. Just because I don't have that many years left. What
you do is I think it's great, and I think your approach has been wonderful. And I guess that's why I wanted to do this podcast, because I think more people need to hear about a positive sort of experience of using psychiatric medications and to really understand what the implications are for, if you do decide you have to go down this route, right?
Yes.
All right. Is there anything that you think we haven't covered that people should know?
Well, one, I mean, don't expect medications to do it all, which we kind of touched on. We know medications alone aren't as robustly successful as we would like, or that people think they are. It really requires the personal work. Mm-hmm. And so I think doing that and really kind of thinking about those lifestyle habits that, aren't just myths, that really are important. So I think that just not expecting medications to do it all, and really kind of then looking to complete the other things so that you can have a meaningful life.
It's definitely a full court press on a number of factors which can influence this. And then run a mile if somebody writes your prescription after 15 minutes, right? Well, listen, let's wrap it up there. It's been fascinating, and I've wanted to get you on here for some time because I think it's really important to tell this story. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks. You're welcome. Thanks for doing this, and hopefully it will help someone.
I'm sure it will.
So that's it for this episode of the Black Dog Cast. I'd just, like to thank again Cecelia for coming on and sharing her expertise on this subject. I think it's super important. There's obviously still a huge stigma around mental health in general. There's probably more of a stigma, to be honest, in seeking out and taking psychiatric medicine. So I would encourage you to share this podcast, share it with your friends. You never know who might be out there that's going through an issue that this sort of thing might help them. The other thing I would ask, if you have a few minutes, go to iTunes, give us a thumbs up and a rating and a comment. It all helps to share the podcast and get it out to a wider audience and people that may find the content useful. That's it for now. Stay tuned for the next episode.